Hey gang, welcome to Big Brother and the Hodling Company. It's a podcast about music and Web3 and trying to fend off Big Brother. I'm a Keegan Voice. Today's book was Cherie who is an award-winning journalist and the founder of Water and Music, which is a collaborative research community that focuses on the intersection of music and tech. Cherie is one of those rare humans who is extremely intelligent, curious about the world, has a strong ethical foundation, and a very low ego. And we chatted about all kinds of things, from playing piano to almost taking the conservatory route, to thinking laterally, to on-chain music, to AI. The catchphrase for the whole thing, I've never seen eggrolls go so hard. And that will make sense after you listen, trust me. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation. Here we go. Hey Cherie, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as with all of these, I always like to start at the beginning and just hear a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and when your relationship with music started.
Yeah, I'm Cherie. I currently spend most of my time as a music and tech writer and researcher and editor. I run a newsletter and research network and community called Water and Music. We focus on analyzing emerging tech trends in the music industry and just how tech innovation in general will impact the business of music. In terms of my relationship with music, it started very young. I started taking piano lessons when I was 5, mainly only because my older sister was also taking lessons. My parents were like, oh, let's see what happens with child number 2. But instantly fell in love with it. And so classical piano ended up taking up a big part of my life early on. Like I was on the conservatory path, did conservatory prep and all that. So that part is still very near and dear to me. I only really learned about the music industry when I was a sophomore in college. So that part of my relationship to music definitely came later. But I still played piano in school. I was in a choir for a few years. And I just started learning how to DJ. So that's a new
That's
a new
cool.
chapter in the Cherie musical saga. So yeah, I try to keep a very close connection to the creative side. But yeah, I guess professionally, it's mostly on the industry side right now.
Cool. I'd love to come back to the DJ thing at some point and also talk about like the Elf Tech, the new song that you came out with using Grimes' Elf Tech. We'll get there. But I want to come back to you playing the piano and talking a little bit about you being on the conservatory route, because I remember the first time that we spoke, that was a really interesting story, and how like your mind was made up to pursue that path. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you had an advisor, or perhaps your piano teacher was actually the one who deterred you from following through and doing like a dual program. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more about that journey and what it felt like to transition away from this very clear life path down this road to something else.
Yes, I think about that moment a lot. So I guess just to sum up what happened. So I started conservatory prep in middle school, so in 6th grade. This was oh gosh, like 2007, 2006, 2007, through the end of high school. Throughout high school, for most summers, I would do like summer kind of conservatory or classical study programs. I spent 2 years at this really great music festival called Aspen Music Festival in school. So you can go and be part of an orchestra, study an instrument, and then just have access to these amazing concerts and kind of explore that part of Colorado. It was amazing, like pure bliss from my perspective. And so I walk into a piano lesson one day and I lay this all out for my teacher, being like, oh, I love the experience of like being in Aspen, like living with so many other musicians, like being solely focused on that. Like maybe I want to go through the audition process and like try going to a conservatory. But I was also like very academically driven at the time. I was super into math specifically. So I was thinking of doing like a math music double major. And my teacher's response was, I think, so thinking back, I guess going through the conservatory prep experience, those summer experiences, you're unless someone proactively tells you about it, you're not open to like the realities of being a working musician in the industry. I think it's like intentionally like the curriculum in a conservatory prep program, or like the way a summer program like that is structured, is to almost be an escape, or to
Mm.
be like, oh, this is like a bounded period of time and a bounded
Mm-hmm.
place where you can just focus on one thing. Maybe like a similar to like a residency experience or something. So yeah, my teacher's response was like I think the first time that I was directly communicated to about the realities of being in the industry. The first thing she said was, Aspen is not reality. Don't base your decision to go into music off of your experience with that festival. And I guess it was a very, I guess, like parental thing to say, not in I don't think in a condescending way or anything, but she like saw that I had other interests. And with math specifically, the way she also said it, which in hindsight, I think is true, is that it's like much more difficult to go back to something like studying math. Like 20 years from now, if you're like super into especially like theoretical levels of math or
Sure.
stats, which I ended up majoring in, it's like while you're young and like your brain is like relatively more fresh, that's probably the right time to go into it. Whereas like music can be like a lifelong pursuit, and there's so many stories of people like going much later in life embracing a career in music, like really succeeding at that. So yeah, I was like so taken aback at the time, but in a way, I'm definitely like equally, if not more fully involved in music in like my day to day than I maybe would have expected. So it all worked out.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just and it's very rare to get that level of like kind of candor and honesty from someone, especially who's so like creatively close to you
Totally.
in that relationship, in the teacher student relationship. So definitely
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned that you think about this moment a lot. And of course, since then, you have been, you're pretty entrenched in the music industry. Like you understand its inner machinations pretty well, more than like almost anybody else in the world. So I'm curious if what the context of you thinking about that moment feels like. Where are you constantly, yeah, she was right. I'm so glad I didn't do that. Or is there still room for, okay, now I understand what this is. I understand the reality, but yet still I could foresee at some point in the future pursuing a career where I'm perhaps more in the performance or like more on the artistry side than you currently are.
So for a few years after that, I definitely had the immediate cultural references, everything everywhere all at once, like that kind of
Yeah.
that being like the default way of thinking, where you're thinking
Hmm.
about all these alternate paths you could have taken.
Totally.
For
Yeah.
sure, I had a lot of that, thinking about what if, yeah, I decided to pursue piano kind of full time. That said, I do think it really helped to, like, I guess, to intentionally study other fields outside of music, and in terms of like the way that I write now and the way that I think about the world and the music industry now, I realized I am a very lateral thinker, and
Mm.
that I get a lot of like curiosity and energy and excitement out of trying to connect ideas or industries or concepts that like people might not otherwise think to connect. But I do think a lot of just like insight and learnings and progress can be made through that kind of thinking, as opposed to like just being like nose to the grindstone, just like hyper focused on just one area. Yeah, and like going through a quote unquote traditional college experience education, I think really helped with that, especially with a math and stats background, and even just that very high level training and like thinking quantitatively, like always questioning any assumptions that are put out there, especially ones that might be backed by data, but that just like constantly digging and inquiring further. So that kind of like training also definitely helped, and I think has helped shape this very specific perspective that I have now on the music industry. Yeah, so there's a really good graphic online somewhere that maps out how a lot of people, when they reach their like 30s or something, they think their future is set. There's no like path left, but actually tens of more like kind of branches that could happen. I mentioned that to say I have definitely not fully discounted like the possibility of, oh, maybe I could do music full time, and I definitely have the knowledge to be able to try. But I like being in the position I am in now of like having a more bird's eye view on what's happening in the industry, and also being able to like play that role for people, like helping people who might not otherwise have time to like synthesize everything that's happening in their field.
Totally. Makes sense. I'm grateful that you were in that position as well because you have provided a ton of value to a lot of people, but also to myself and all the writing and reporting that I do and the ways that I think about music and the music industry as well. So I'm grateful that you're in this position. But I
Thank you.
also,
Thank you.
of course, and I also think it's cool that you're leaving space potentially for some later career pivot toward becoming a rock star. I would love to talk a little bit about the moment because when I first encountered your writing, it was like early Water and Music days, like where Water and Music was the name of your project, of kind of the umbrella through which you were publishing material, and talk about the moment where you decided to kind of transition from like more of a one directional subscription model where people were consuming your content to a more bi-directional community that has since flourished. But I'm curious to hear about that moment of transition and why you decided to open up and go in that direction.
Yeah, there were a few different factors. I guess what's interesting to reflect on with water music is that I would say most of its growth actually happened over the pandemic.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say like late 2020. I also like only started working on it full time in 2020. I juggled it with freelancing for a year, but then went in full time 2020. Timing was definitely really crazy with the pandemic, but it was also was a time that yeah, I guess everyone was spending so much time online and were also interested in like better understanding, try to dig into what that means for music of just all this like all the experience around music kind of being shoved into a screen. Like how do we even make sense of that? Yeah, that was a lot of the theme for 2020 and then through end of 2021, which was also when we started experimenting with this collaborative research model and formalizing that and like the much more community driven engine behind everything we do at Water and Music. So COVID obviously still exists, but in terms of lifestyle, it's completely changed. I think for a lot of people, and especially for the music industry, like live shows have very much returned from what we saw in our community. People were not spending their time 24/7 on Discord. They
Mhm.
wanted to go touch grass,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
actually hang out with and see people
Yeah.
in
Totally makes sense.
yeah, yeah, in real life. So on the community side, that triggered a more intentional investment in IRL events, like just ranging from build that iteratively over time, still iterating on it, but starting with like intentional meetups like around conferences and like intentionally scheduling that up all the way up to our very own conference that we did in May of this year.
Which was great.
Oh yeah, thank you. So that's on the community side. And then on the kind of data side, so another thing that we started piloting was what we call the Water Music Academy. So these
Mhm.
are these kind of paid, much more focused educational experiences, diving into a specific topic in music and tech in a way that was much more like hands-on and actionable and case study driven. And we launched that just also, I guess, being mindful of our audience and how they were trying to use a lot of the information we were producing. Like we would produce these reports with tons of data and we would try to like give suggestions on like things you could explore in your career or in whatever projects you had to like try to put this to good use. But there was still a gap in terms of people like I guess actually like in terms of I guess making that information as actionable as possible,
Mhm.
like beyond just sitting in an article.
Right.
So we're thinking, oh, like why don't we make these dedicated spaces to like close that gap for people and actually get more hands-on with the findings from our research. And so that we have so the academy has been a really good place for that. And a lot of how we're thinking about future events is very much built around that as well. Like we're sitting on a ton of research and case studies around music and tech. How can we actually help people like apply and translate that directly to their work?
Cool. No, I appreciate that. I think it's such an important gap to fill from the theoretical, what is the data telling us to, okay, how do we, as you said, how do we make this actionable? I think the collaborative nature that you've been able to cultivate and sustain is really incredible. And I know back during the pandemic or soon after, you decided to go the DAO route to become a decentralized autonomous organization. You went through Seed Club and created the Stream token. And I I've noticed that has disappeared recently from your branding and from your identity. And I'm curious to hear why and what the evolution of that identity was going into it, and what's happened since.
Oh yes, this could be a whole hour conversation. Maybe will be. Yes. So I guess so going into the C Club cohort we were a part of, which was fall 2021. I knew I really wanted to experiment with collaborative research as a way of showing people, especially in music, which is a very historically siloed industry in terms of information sharing or knowledge sharing, like what could be possible if we approach things more collaboratively, and doing research on the most interesting or effective tech stacks to make that happen. Everything just kept pointing back to tokens, or I guess blockchain in general, like being able to showcase your contribution history across a wide range of projects in like a verifiable, like decentralized way and transparent way. Everything just kept pointing back to blockchain. So that was a huge motivating factor to go through C Club, is just like really nailing what that infrastructure looks like. And I think the DAO landscape as a whole is still reckoning in real time with how, I guess, everyone in that space used the word DAO to describe like actually 10 plus like very different kinds of organizations. And yeah, I guess, and my learning experience and Water Music's learning experience was in a few different phases. So like we produced season 1 in only 8 weeks. It was like a complete whirlwind. People just like huddling in a Discord server, being like, how do we do this thing? What is collaborative research? No one knows. But let's make these threads in Discord and see what comes out. And it was like such an amazing first experiment where I think like every step was actually quite open and decentralized in its own way. And we had that ambition from like idea generation to research to editing and then like kind of design, that being like totally open. I think what we found over time was that like fully decentralizing every aspect of how an organization runs, especially if you're trying to grow it and sustain it to a certain level and maintain a certain level of quality, is really hard. And so how I guess subsequent seasons changed is that we ended up opening up only certain parts of the research process to be more community driven. So like we would always start, for example, we'd always start every research season with an open brainstorming session where like dozens of people in the community would come in and suggest ideas to research in a given topic and try to make their case for like why a certain avenue was important to explore for the season around AI, for example. And then we've done like a wide range of interviews for every season, and like recommending people to interview or even like conducting those interviews, as long as you have the right kind of like training and onboarding, we open that up to a lot more people. In contrast, having 20 people in a Google Doc really doesn't work. And just to be like very candid about that, I'm very open to counter opinions from anyone listening. Like we've found a way to make it work, but from like an editor's perspective, especially just like, I guess with the reality that a lot of people who may be collaborating, like they have their own voice, their own way of speaking, maybe their own agendas coming in. And from an editing perspective, managing that, we found like the sweet spot or the maximum is having maybe 5 people in a doc. But like even then, it's still like a much tougher editing job to go through that than if it's just 1 to 2 people writing. Which is, yeah, I'd like to believe there's a future tech solution that makes it easier to like synthesize multiple people's voices into something that feels more cohesive. But so like that process, and then we found with, especially because I guess Water Music had been around for a few years and developed its own specific voice before going into this collaborative research mode, it felt difficult to decentralize marketing fully. So that's actually something that like goes against a hypothesis I initially had, I think, looking at something like nouns, which like I think the main difference is that from the very beginning they were like, our only goal is to spread the meme. You just do that. You can do that however which way you want. And that is like very well suited for fully decentralized kind of marketing. For Water Music, not so much.
Right.
To wrap up this very long answer, I think so the stream token still exists, and we have a series of events coming up. We have a new academy coming up where people could still like submit their wallet and get streamed. That's as like the on-chain crediting layer to signify that you've contributed to the Water Music like network of projects or to the community at large. It still plays a function. But in terms of decision making, based on the kind of work that we do, we found that fully decentralizing it, or even partially decentralizing it, only works at certain like steps or certain parts of the org. And then honestly, a big part for legal reasons, there have been a lot of legal issues around DAOs, at least in the US, to the point where I don't think it makes sense for us to like really lead into like using tokens as a form of like fundraising, for example. I know a lot of DAOs like looked into that initially, but we're holding off on that for now. So it's more like back end contribution tracking and crediting, and like using blockchain as just one tech tool in a wider suite of tools at our disposal.
It makes sense. It makes sense. I think a lot of people try to pigeonhole themselves into we're a Web 2 company, we're a Web 3 company, or like we're a Web 2.5 company for people who haven't quite decided. But yeah, I've always felt that to be a little problematic when people just try to lean into Web 3, like only use the blockchain, even when it doesn't necessarily fit their purpose or provide the best solution to what their intention is with whatever the project or product is. So yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious from like a structural perspective, thinking about the DAO, of course, that also exists on a spectrum, like decentralization is a spectrum, autonomy is a spectrum, I guess. Autonomy is, you could talk about the pure definition of these things, but they all like in practice actually exist on spectrums. Organization also exists on a spectrum. Because of that, that can be inclusive of so many different types of entities and different ventures. And of course, part of that is what comes with that is like corporate governance and how that works. But also, there's been a really interesting tension, I think, with how a lot of specifically Web3 projects have been financed. And one of the things I love about Water Music is that you've stayed away from venture capital. And I think the first time we connected, you mentioned that it just wasn't a model that you were interested in, even though people, or the reason that people take venture capital is because it makes things easier, provides you with a lot of resources, especially in the short term, that you couldn't get otherwise. And I would love to just dive into that a little bit as a collaborative structure that isn't necessarily a DAO, but is still very committed to being collaborative, to hear like your thoughts, your perspectives, and like why that isn't an interesting model for you and your vision for the financial structure or economic structure of water and music in general, to as much as you can talk about it.
Yeah, in general, the VC financing model is certainly interesting, and every day there's like a new project that sounds completely ridiculous that announces like $50 million in funding, and I read it and I'm like, what are we doing? Like,
Yeah.
again, like everything ever all at once, just like life flashes before your eyes. And yeah, it's definitely not. And yeah, the only instance where I've considered it slightly is in situations where we've tried to put out like prototypes of tech products. For example, we around season 1.5, so like our second Web3 report, we put out a contract template around like music NFTs, and that ended up being like the longest running. We ended up like maintaining and updating that for over 6 months, so for quite a while. But to really grow something like that, especially thinking about bringing on engineers and like incentivizing them properly, I think there's an argument to be made that you need just a lot more capital, and I guess VC is the first thing that comes to mind. So yeah, we've thought about it in that context, but in terms of our mission, which I always go back to when evaluating any business decision, which we also voted on as a community last year, of making the music industry more innovative, cooperative, and transparent. And I think the part about cooperation is the really key word here. Also transparency in terms of evaluating what funding models to use. I had a conversation with a VC earlier this year where they explicitly said that they needed information silos to like do their job well. Like they needed like first access to, in the sense of like first access to information that no one else had, and that is like a huge part of what drives a good investment, which I totally understand. And then the minute I heard that, I was like, okay, yeah, it's not. This is not gonna fly. Obviously, we gate information to like Water Music, but we have a paid membership, so there's still obviously like some kind of filter, but I'd like to think it's a lot more affordable than traditional market research where like that's a matter of gating it behind like tens of thousands of dollars of like payment. So we're trying to work towards making it more open and accessible. And yeah, I think just so not just the growth incentives, but also, yeah, just that mindset around information and knowledge sharing that comes with entering the VC world just isn't the best fit, I think, for us right now. And yeah, especially for like our mission of just like trying to incentivize more people to share more information with each other. I think it just needs other rails. In relation to that, we haven't officially implemented this, but we've looked very seriously and for a while into a co-op structure. And there are a lot of businesses I admire that are structured as co-ops. I would say in media, one example is Defector Media. They have to my knowledge, I don't think they have any Web3 business interests. They are just a collective of writers who cover sports, spin-off of Deadspin. But yeah, and there's a sense of, actually in their latest annual report, I think they compared, or in recent profile of Defector, one of their founding members compared it to like running a very successful neighborhood bar. If you if you think about like the business incentives behind a neighborhood bar, or what the goal is, it's to foster community and obviously to make enough money to just keep doing cool stuff and providing this cool experience to the neighborhood. There's no sense of wanting to get to McDonald's level of franchising or just like growing super quickly. It's just providing this very niche experience. And so reading that really resonated with me. I think water music, even though like there certainly is more room for growth, I think, or like kind of expansion of what we do across music and outside of music. Especially because we are so community driven, that's the vibe I want to keep like fostering too within. It's like we're here to hopefully water music can be like the cool hipster bar where people in the music industry go to chat and hopefully not gossip too much, but maybe gossip a little bit about what's happening in the industry, especially in tech, and grow thoughtfully with that ethos in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I think it's a really healthy mindset to have. And a lot of the writing I've been doing recently is just about this idea of scale and how like a lot of the platforms that we rely upon to interact in digital spaces are kind of scale at all costs, which comes at the expense of any sort of neighborhood bar kind of aesthetic where you can like really think locally and you can cultivate intimacy with people and truly create connective spaces. And I think that is one of the more exciting things about reimagining the internet in this decentralized place. And there's, perhaps you probably know, there's this initiative for digital public infrastructure out of UMass Amherst that has been talking about this, about the three-legged stool is what they're calling the approach, and organizing around it's like VSOPs, very small online platforms, or very specific online platforms. I think they use both. And it just feels like such a healthier, it feels like such a healthier alternative, and it feels akin to what you're building and what your vision and what your ethos is. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on the viability and real, how pragmatic is that utopian thinking that we can somehow subvert these trillion-dollar interests of these like huge tech companies to create a more local version of the internet filled with cool neighborhood bars and little libraries and stuff like that.
Ooh, yeah, I think those, at least, so I'm thinking on the timeline of 5 to 10 years, next 5 to 10 years. Certainly, those like large trillion-dollar companies will not go away. I think they've just thinking like with Meta, for example, as a company, command is maybe a strong word, but they reach like probably at this point around a quarter to a third of the world population. So they're just their reach is just so vast. And for better or for worse, they do play like a very important role in terms of delivering information to people. So I don't think that will go away. That said, to go with Meta actually as another example, I remember a few years ago, I was seeing billboards everywhere about Facebook specifically really trying to lean into like communities or groups. Like that was like the only thing being advertised. Join your group, find your crew, find your tribe. Facebook is the place to do it. And Facebook groups definitely still exist, but I like the only thing that I've heard from like community moderators is complaints about how Facebook groups are structured, like what the main features are. And that's very telling to me because if you're a platform that's that large and that generalist, like naturally things are going to fall through the cracks when you're trying to build those very specific community experiences because you're trying to cast as wide of a net as possible. So I think and then also when you consider social apps like TikTok and the impact that they've had on people being able to like find like-minded groups of people who have the most bizarre combination of interests. Like I always say, okay, I'll just pull this example out of thin air. If you're a hyperpop artist who loves waffles, if that's your thing and that's your shtick, like you will find an audience. Like nothing in the TikTok-esque era of these algorithms working and being engineered in a very smart way to make sure whatever you create is reaching the right people. That is nothing is too niche or bizarre. This whole Pinky Doll phenomenon of like, NPC TikTok, I think is like prime example, although that actually is maybe a bigger trend than some people may assume. But so nothing is too niche or specific to the point where there is not only is there an opportunity to build a very specific like community experience around like a very specific taste or point of view, but increasingly, I think people are in a very noisy world. People are seeking that specificity, and and from a community building perspective, it's not a weakness to be specific. It's actually a strength where like people can go to you and be like, I know I'm going to get this perspective. I'm not going to get this. This space is for these kinds of, or for people with these interests, not for people who are not interested in XYZ. Yeah. So I think there's the opportunity for like kind of niche community experiences is very much there. But yeah, I'm still on the fence about whether that will be like the default mode against the backdrop of these like mega big tech companies, which like are still going to be around, but like the niche experience is not going to be their strength.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's a world where TikTok, for instance, becomes like the discovery layer, and then there's a set of kind of world building tools that become traditional? Maybe not like a Discord, which is like maybe what a lot of people are using now to cultivate these very niche, I guess, communities, but is still a generalist platform that only has so much customization opportunities. Do you see that as a viable future in which, TikTok is like this discoverability layer where you're matched with your other your hyper pop waffle people, and then you have this like huge tool set that you can pull from to build your hyper pop waffle palace?
This sounds so good, actually. I want IHOP to, I guess maybe, no, not IHOP, Waffle House to build the hyperpop Waffle House. Yes. Yeah, I guess I'm most familiar with the music industry, but this very much is already happening. So like TikTok, actually like every 6 months, like clockwork, there's a new article that comes out about how TikTok is like the savior for discovery, but it's so hard to connect with actual fans. So I think that's case in point of what you're talking about. Of like TikTok really being, I think Spotify still plays this role, but used to play that role primarily back in the day. Really like having these great recommendation systems to make sure that your music is like reaching the right people. And if you want to strengthen that connection from either side, like an artist trying to reach out to your fans or as a budding fan trying to learn more about an artist, TikTok and Spotify are not really made for that. Yes, you can dive into their backlog of videos or their backlog of songs on a streaming service, but if you're trying to like really enter their worlds in a more holistic sense, you do have to go off platform most of the time. And so yeah, like the funnel, it's definitely not one size fits all, but just thinking about my like fan experience, it's very often like Spotify, maybe like on Instagram, which is like obviously a huge platform in general, but also for music. But then to like what really seals the deal on trust is actually usually some kind of live event. Like it could be like a show, or it could be like a live stream. Like I think platforms like Twitch actually play a very important role, or like live streams on TikTok. I think that's a big reason why a lot of people are leaning more into live. Yeah, so I think that segmentation of the different roles that different platforms play is already happening. So like TikTok, Spotify is for discovery, but then both on an emotional and a financial level, if you're trying to build a more direct and intimate experience or world with like people who are more loyal, who like are bigger fans of your stuff, you do have to build that separately.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting, and it also feels there is a more insidious element of this in which like TikTok, all of these big platforms have their own financial interests at play, and they are acting as intermediaries that are taking cuts, and there isn't any transparency. There's very little knowledge of what's actually happening like to your data, and to be able, like, maybe there is an element of wanting to remove yourself from that system to build something that is more controlled, that is more direct, which I guess is a big narrative and that exists in web theory, like the disintermediation, the decentralization that is possible, and like the composability of using different tools to satisfy your use case. That's an aside, but coming back to TikTok, because I have another TikTok question for you. Coming back to what you said in terms of there has always been this kind of abstraction and these gaps like between the walled gardens of places like TikTok and Spotify and Instagram, where you can't satisfy like everything that you want to do as a fan. You have to move from step to go through the funnel, which creates a lot of friction and like competing incentives, again, that are financial and have to do with privacy across all of these huge tech platforms. And specifically with music, something I think about a lot is the abstraction of context in a place, Spotify, where there's just the music. It's purely consumption focused. Spotify doesn't care so much who you're listening to as long as you're listening. And TikTok, of course, and Instagram provide like a social layer to it, but it is removed. Now, I'm curious about TikTok music, and because this ostensibly brings these two things together in a way that hasn't really been done before at like this level of scale with this many resources. And I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on, is TikTok music going to be a Spotify killer, for instance?
Very interesting point, or like entry point to think about in terms of context, because something that's definitely been true for Spotify's like viral 50 chart, or even like global 200, is that historically, meaning in the last like 3 to 5 years, a huge chunk of that has just been from TikTok's charts. If you took the songs that went the most viral on TikTok, like Spotify would be a lagging indicator of what was happening on TikTok. So it totally makes sense that like TikTok would want to launch their own service and be like, why are we letting someone else be the main like platform to display that activity? In terms of whether it's going to be a Spotify killer, so with ByteDance as the parent company, I can definitely see TikTok music or other music initiatives they have being more successful in markets outside the US and Europe, which are becoming like much more influential culturally and also just have many more people. The market for paid music streaming in like outside the US and Europe is still very much like yet to be proven, though, especially in like Asia and Africa and Latin America. Like most people are not paying for music. They're like much wider majority of people than in the USA are not paying for music. But yeah, but like ByteDance already is like already very active in those areas, and I think has a maybe a deep understanding of consumer behavior in those markets. And I know Spotify has struggled to grow in all those areas too. Or it's growing like very incrementally, but just looking at their financial reports, like not as quickly as one might expect or as they had forecasted. Yeah, so from that angle, like having a very international view on what is driving culture and having a really solid handle on that, I can actually see TikTok and ByteDance rivaling, if not overtaking Spotify. Yeah, the business case for like music streaming specifically is like a whole different question. I'm not sure if TikTok music will like, yeah, bring in more paid subscribers than Spotify, but they don't have to because they are a much bigger company, and they also have like their own music distribution service too. I think it's called SoundOn. So I think their goal is to, regardless of the margins, position themselves as like the place you can go as an artist to get your music heard and really. And they, yeah, as you said, they certainly have the resources to do that in a way that Spotify does not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's why I specifically mentioned Spotify. Is this a Spotify killer? Because it's becoming like increasingly difficult to see how they can hang around for another 5 to 10 years when they can't function as a loss leader in the same way that all of these other streaming platforms can. And especially when you look at like the market cap, of something like Spotify, which is now I think like 25, 30 billion, I think currently, versus Apple, which is like over $1 trillion. And it's these streaming platforms don't need to make money or even come close to it. They're a drop in the bucket. And now with TikTok also entering the fray in a more serious way and offering additional value in terms of the social element as well, it's hard to see. I don't think Spotify is going to die tomorrow, but it's hard to see like a viable path amidst these huge behemoth companies.
Yeah, and I guess they really leaned aggressively into podcasting to try to make it work,
Right.
but it's been fascinating to see them like lean very much away from that this year and try to go all in on music. But yeah, I would not rule out an exit. I don't know who,
Yeah.
but I know that's been because it's just been so long. They've been around for so long and have only made or registered a profit for 1 quarter, I think, like early on.
I know.
There's
It's
definitely more
crazy.
conversation about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation talking about streaming as a business model, but we can leave that alone for now and focus on the music as Spotify has been doing this year. And I would love to circle back and come back to you making music again and talk a little bit. We haven't touched on AI at all. Obviously, that is a huge other thing that we don't really need to dive into because we could talk about that for a long time. I know it's a big focus of water music currently, but I'd love to talk about your song Eggroll. And if you could share just a little bit of context surrounding elf tech, surrounding Grimes, some of the mechanics and reasons that this exists and how it could potentially be a model for how artists are proactive around things like voice modeling and some of the monetization potential that comes from using AI in this way, and then just talk about the song, like the creation of the song itself.
Yeah, all very exciting stuff. Yeah, AI obviously is probably the hottest topic right now in any culture industry, entertainment industry. It poses super existential issues. Yeah, definitely no surprise that it's like the number one topic around like the writer's strike right now. So a lot of artists feeling, or like a lot of creative professionals having very like existential discussions right now. Only a handful of artists have, I think, are in a position and also have the willingness and interest to buck that trend by leaning super into the technology and having just a much more open approach to just like people remixing their art, like making derivatives of their art. And Grimes is certainly one of those artists. I mean, if you look at her like history as an artist and how early relatively she was like talking about blockchain also and like experimenting with like NFTs and other aspects of Web3. Connection to Elon also, of course, having
Sure.
probably something to do with that.
Yeah.
But just in general, like her ethos as an artist and like her persona is very much like leaning into like the new tech, seeing it as like an aesthetic outlet. And so AI is definitely no exception. So she and her management company, which they also run their own kind of like software startup called CreateSafe, they built a website called ElfTech that allows anybody to transform any audio into Grimes's voice for free. So today you can go to elf.tech, I believe is the site, and upload, like you can upload this podcast recording and just have Grimes talking to Grimes.
Whoa, that'd be pretty wild.
That would be actually so funny.
Yeah,
But yeah.
I might have to do that.
I think you could only upload like 30 to 60-second chunks, so not the whole
Okay,
episode, but I
okay.
actually really want to hear that.
Yeah, maybe I'll take 30 seconds, like a key, or like the most quotable thing from this conversation. I'll put
Those
like 3
clickbaity
up
things.
there.
Oh, that's so funny. Wow, didn't even think about that like before, but yes. Her management's tech company also like runs their own in-house music distribution. And they also created their own system where you can submit any song that uses Grimes AI voice for official like crediting of the Grimes AI artist on streaming services, and then they have an agreement where, and then if it's an officially vetted Grimes AI song, you could have it live on all DSPs officially, where the master royalties on the song are split 50-50 between the artist and Grimes. And also to be clear, there's like literally no standard for like how this works. I think Grimes is probably the only artist, especially of that stature, to set that precedent of, yeah, would love for you to make these songs, just give me a cut of the revenue. And then importantly, also people, I think the original artist owns I believe they own the publishing, so they own like the underlying song. It's just that because Grimes' voice is in the recording, they can do whatever they want with it. Super interesting model. How this relates to Eggroll, the song that myself and my colleague and friend Young Spielberg, who is a music producer, how that came about. Yeah, so Young and I, we were just in LA earlier in the year, and I like never really recorded anything in the proper studio environment before. So he was like, oh, let's stop by my studio, we'll make something for fun. And there was some inside joke about egg rolls. There was an advertisement we passed by that had egg rolls on a plate looking like cigars. And we were like, what is going on? And I've never seen egg rolls go so hard in our
That's
lives.
the quote
And so
right
we
there.
made,
I've never seen egg rolls go so hard. That's what's going through Avtech.
yeah, amazing. Yes. So we just made a song for fun. Didn't even write the lyrics. We just knew we wanted to encapsulate the vibe of that day, of seeing that egg roll ad. But then we made it for fun, and I don't think we planned on releasing it. It just sat on Young's hard drive as just like a fun memento. Oh, we like met up and made this song. A few months later, Grimes AI comes out, Elf Tech comes out, and Young immediately, like very much a producer's mind, this is what's missing from the song. We need like this. So my voice, like my talking voice, which translates to singing a bit, is definitely a little bit deeper, or like alto, whereas Grimes' voice is like much more higher pitched, more like feminine and airy. And yeah, it like all happened so fast. Young was like, we need Grimes, and then he like wrote out a whole like verse and chorus, like multiple verses, like for the song. I guess having that voice in his head, he wrote out like all the lyrics for the song, basically just like in one go. And he's like, all right, Cherie, can you like record these lyrics and I'll translate them into Grimes' voice and we'll see what happens. And it just ended up being like a very good, very kind of tongue-in-cheek fit. Importantly, I realized after the song came out, a lot of people assumed that because it had Grimes AI as the featured artist and we were talking about it a little bit as an AI track, a lot of people had the assumption that we just clicked a button and made the song. And then like it like get one click house banger that happened to have Grimes' voice on it. Whereas in reality, it very much was like still a traditional production process. Like the only role that AI played was in transforming my voice into Grimes' voice. But then Young still was working in a traditional DAW, laying down all the instrumentation. That was still him with feedback from me, and still very much a back and forth traditional process in that sense. But yeah, so then we made the song, submitted it through the portal. We heard back from their management very quickly, actually, which is like a good sign that they're very actively like scouring through. They must have gotten like hundreds, if not thousands, of submissions at this point. Yeah, so we heard back from them being like, this is amazing.
Oh, awesome. Were they like, I've never seen eggrolls go so hard?
Yeah. That's the tagline now.
Yeah.
No, or I think what's also even like processing the whole experience now, what I love about the experience and what I'd like to see more in terms of the underlying spirit in AI creation is that like Grimes would never make a slap house song, let alone one about egg rolls. I don't think. Like her aesthetic is like very different.
Yeah.
And but I guess the very specific like taste of Young and myself led to this song that was able to be uniquely created and like uniquely living in this world thanks to voice AI specifically. So yeah, that was definitely part of the conversation. Oh, this is so different, but would still love to have this be part of the Grimes like creative ecosystem. So yeah, so we went through the traditional kind of release process for that. It came out on June 30th. And I'm actually in the middle of like a more standard process of trying to build out a marketing strategy for the song.
Oh,
What's the TikTok challenge? Speaking of TikTok, I've started just for fun making my own egg roll review sheet. So like touring egg rolls in New York City, trying to think about videos for that. So I'm in that. I'm in that hustle now.
Cool. I can't wait to see
Yeah.
that manifest. Yeah, there's so many things that you can do with egg rolls. I also thought it's a really interesting point thinking about not something I'd really thought about, but your comment about people just thinking this was like a one-click banger and thinking about like consumer expectations, just knowing that AI exists or knowing that AI was somehow involved in the creation of the song, all of a sudden it obfuscates any effort that the artists do put it in a way that is strange. I'm curious to see how that changes or evolves as people get more and more used to the idea of AI being part of, I guess, kind of music creation.
Yeah, a few thoughts. So I think that the what's the name? Heart on My Sleeve, like the big deep fake Drake song by Ghostwriter. I'm pretty sure was a similar situation where people talked about it as an AI song, not knowing that I'm pretty sure like AI only played the role in like the vocal transformation layer. You still had to like lay down a beat, like master it properly. Like it was a pretty like well produced song. I
Totally.
think by all standards. Yeah, so already around like the mainstream deepfake conversation, there's that like gap between expectation and reality about how much can actually be automated. It is moving really fast. Like in the last few weeks, like just this week as of recording this, Meta officially released a whole suite of audio AI generation tools that are actually really good. I think they're maybe even a little better than the model that Google released just like a few months ago. So it's like the momentum is growing, but it's certainly not at the level of one click being able to generate like clean audio by any means. We're very far from that. So that's an important point. And then I guess second point is more general. I realized like a lot of, so not even thinking about AI, I feel like a lot of people might not even be aware of the whole machine that goes behind making a song anyway. Like I feel like the concept of crediting songwriters properly on streaming services is only like a few years old at most. And even then,
Messy.
yeah. And even then, I don't know, like a lot of the data is really messy, or songwriters don't actually have pages on streaming services. And with a very small number of exceptions, that there very much is this idea of the singular celebrity, like the artist
Right.
that is driving
Did it all.
everything. Without any awareness of the huge number of producers, songwriters, engineers that might be working behind the scenes. And I feel like, yeah, I don't know if this AI movement will make that worse or better in terms of like people's awareness of all the different kinds of roles that you could play in a more standard like music creation process, and how that collapses, if at all, with like truly generative AI. Yeah, it remains to be seen, but that's always been like a cultural gap of like the vast majority of people just not being aware in the first place of what's involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true across like the entirety of the music industry, like the way that the economics work, the way that music making works. It's like there's people just want to focus on like the music and the artist, the star, and not think about everything else, even though it's pretty important.
Yeah.
So before we go, I still want to hear about this new foray that you're embarking upon, this new DJing journey, and hear like where you're at, what your goals are with that.
Oh yeah, let's see where to start. So as a fan, I love going to just like electronic shows in general, and I really appreciate like a really well thought out mix or set. And I feel like I came of age, and part of my like coming of age process in the music industry or growth experience, the side that's more for fun is definitely spending like 5-6 hours just like on the dance floor, just appreciating like a very good mix. Like those have been like some of my favorite shows I've been to. Yeah, it's just how my brain like reacts to music. Is just like very sensitive and like reacts in a very positive way to especially interesting, I guess, like harmonic or rhythmic changes over time. So just, I guess in short, I've always like wanted to play that role as a DJ, and I guess as like a curator at large, but never. And so I have a Spotify playlist called DJ Set Material that I just didn't use for years, but I filled it with, it has over 700 songs now. I'm
Nice.
like,
A lot
I
of
would love to
material.
put this, I would love to put this in a set if I had the chance. But yeah, I don't know. It was just a mental barrier that was temporary, but maybe because the equipment seemed too like esoteric. I didn't know how to use it. I just like never made the jump. What convinced me was actually NFT NYC this year. This was in April 2023. I had a friend reach out and be like, "Oh, do you want? I'm looking for someone to just help DJ this like brand activation event for the first hour. Do you want to come?" And I was like, "Yes, let's do it." My mind, I was like, "If not now, then
When?
never." Yeah, not now, then when? So yeah, that was in April, and then since then, I've DJ'd mostly just for friends though, like an audience of maximum like 10 people, just like
Sure.
in a kickback or something.
Cool.
But I am going to do my first paid gig at the
Wow.
end of August. I don't know
Cool.
if this is I don't know if this will be out by then,
Try to
but
make it happen. We can try to promote this
we
show.
can promo. I'm gonna be DJing the closing of the Mutech Forum.
Wow.
So
That's
in
awesome.
Montreal,
Cool.
which is like more, I guess, the conference workshop side of the festival. Yeah, I'll just do a happy hour. I'm gonna play some upbeat house disco type stuff, which should be fun. Yeah. So it's progressing, but I'm purely in it just for the musical pleasure of just trying to map out a mix, seeing which songs, again, especially like which songs blend together in ways that people might not expect, and like opening up their minds that way. I'm very excited by that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I love that. Wish I could be there.
We'll post videos probably.
Okay, cool. Please do.
Yes.
Yeah, before I ask this last question that I ask everybody at the end of these, I just will also, I'd written a note. I was rereading, our last interview before this, and you had mentioned that a lot of the piano players that you really fell in love with and that were inspiring you as a young pianist just had this really nice convergence of like expression with also technical skill. And this kind of like cross section, this convergence of being able to capture the technical and the expressive side of things is something that I think Water and Music does like incredibly well. And it's a sweet spot of what should be happening, I guess, across music tech, but isn't able to. Oftentimes the expression just isn't there. Like we're not enabling this expression, like the expressive side of it. So I just wanted to leave that out there because it just felt like this nice encompassing metaphor for what you do and like where we should be trying to go is walk this tightrope between those two things.
Thank you so much. That's great.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you. You're the one who actually provided the metaphor. All right, last question for you. You're going to a desert island. You get to bring 3 records with you. What are they?
Ooh. 3 records. Oh gosh. Okay, I'm just gonna rattle them off. If I were flown to a desert island today,
Okay.
Mordecai by Crumbin will be one of them. That they're definitely one of my favorite bands, and that album is just every time I listen through it, no skips. It's just like a balm, like a very musical balm over my brain.
like
It's hard to
that.
think about. To calm down, listen to that album. To dance, Cage Renata 99.9%.
Nice.
Like modern, like definition of modern classic dance album. So dance, and then to like reminisce on my life. Probably the Beatles One album.
Wow,
So I
cool.
realized, I don't know if this is a common experience growing up, but from when I was like 3 years old to 3 to 6, I only really grew up around listening to the same 5 albums over and over again. I think also because of like my parents
Yeah.
and what they listened to. And one of them was the Beatles One album. Like long car rides, we'd always just play that on loop. So very special place. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of, if I were to pick the whatever 4 or 5 albums that I heard from the ages of 3 to 6, it was also that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like to the
So
point when I
funny.
still hear like something like Eleanor Rigby or something, I still expect, I think it goes into Penny Lane maybe after that or
Yep,
something.
yep.
I still expect to hear Penny Lane after that song ends, and that's cool. That's cool. I haven't thought about one in
That's
a
so
while.
funny.
It's good. It actually took a while for me to explore beyond beyond one? Obviously, like there's a lot of music the
It
Beatles
took,
made.
I did not know they had more
Yeah.
albums until way too late. And it was when I was talking to one of my friends who's like I think she mentioned the White Album. And I was like, what's that?
Yeah.
She's like, Cherie.
Yeah. And the White Album, I don't think has any songs that are on one, which is
Nope.
interesting. They didn't have any number
Nope.
one hits off of that record, even though it's pretty packed full of jams.
Yeah.
Cool, Cherie. This has been great. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and all of your wisdom. For people who want to follow along or get involved with what you're doing, where's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, thank you again for having me. You can follow everything we're doing with Water and Music on Twitter and Instagram, water_and_music, and spelled out is our handle. I'm also on Twitter at SherryWho42, and you should sign up for our newsletter. There should be a form at the top of our site where you can sign up.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Awesome. Thanks again, Cherie, and talk to you soon. Be well.
Yeah, you too. Thanks again.
All right, that's it for this episode of Big Brother and the Hodling Company. I'm your host, McKeegan Voice, and you can keep up with me and all the latest Web3 music trends on Twitter at McKeegan. That's MACEAGON. This show is a production of Decential Media, and you can visit us at decential.io, and remember, only you can prevent and fend off Big Brother.